Okay, great. All right, awe. When I first started thinking about awe, it was during a time, quite a long time in my life, when I lacked it, when I yearned to recapture that sense of wonder that we've been hearing about in these songs, that sense of wonder that I experienced sometimes in the past. And I began to think about a homily when I encountered a book of poems by a Canadian astronomer, Rebecca Elson, and they had the intriguing title, A Responsibility to Awe. So next, Amanda.
Yep.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Can you not see it very well?
Yeah, no, I can see it now.
Okay.
I've never connected those words, responsibility and awe, before. Do I have a responsibility to be a person of awe? So today I'd like to talk a little about what I understand of awe, recount a little of my own story, and then outline what I've learned about becoming more open to awe. I had no idea when I proposed the topic that awe has become a thing now. It's as reflected in these recent book titles, and these are just 6 I picked up off Amazon. I'm coming at the topic from my experience, informed by some of what I've been reading, but I am not a scientist of awe. Awe is an emotion that's, I think, is challenging to describe in words. Poetry and metaphor perhaps are best suited. However, we know how we feel when we feel awe. Our bodies react. We might have shivers down our spine, goosebumps on our arms. Our eyebrows might lift and our eyes might open wide. We might tear up. And instinctively, we make a sound like wow or whoa or ooh-ah. Whatever language we might speak, whatever language, awe elicits similar sounds universally. So it is built into our human physiological makeup. We're wired for it. Dacher Keltner, one of the authors of those books, defines awe as the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends our current understanding of the world. And vast can be metaphorical, not necessarily physical, like the Adams River Salmon Run or this Utah desert. We each, all of us here, might remember a profound experience with awe, but we can also have everyday awe, moments that we experience more frequently, where our consciousness shifts and we connect with something outside of ourselves. Originally, awe meant inspiring dread or terror, often in the religious sense of the divine inspiring terror. Hence the word awful. And there still might be elements of fear in our awe. For example, if I was to encounter an awe-inspiring bear up in these grasslands, but most of the time though, when we feel awe, our sense of self dissolves and we connect to something beyond us. We may lose our sense of time, our consciousness shifts from awareness of ourself to an elevated one. When Blake wrote those opening words, to see heaven in a wildflower, I think he was writing about awe, about that feeling of connection to something vast and unknown when we consider a miracle such as a flower. The word wonder, and we've heard wonder this morning, is sometimes used interchangeably with awe. But I suggest that wonder includes an element of curiosity, and that curiosity might lead to awe, and in fact, might lead to scientific discovery. And I will circle back to that later. Now, benefits of awe. Awe benefits our health and our well-being. And from a physical perspective, it calms our nervous system, slows our heart rate, helps digestion, deepens breathing, and counters the stress or the damage that stress does to our bodies. Awe is associated with the release of oxytocin, the hormone that helps us trust and bond. And perhaps awe helps humans survive as a species, because perhaps it enabled us to live together in groups. So there's a societal benefit as well as an individual one. When we experience awe, the part of our brain that influences how we perceive ourselves is deactivated, it's quieted. Instead of being preoccupied with ourselves, we connect to others, to community, to the earth. Awe increases our sense of belonging, even if we experience it by ourselves. And this really astounded me, awe makes us more compassionate and less materialistic. So, how do we attain awe? Awe is often triggered when we witness or hear stories of people's courage, their kindness, their strength in overcoming adversity. Dacher Keltner, the author of one of those books, he calls this moral beauty. And he says that moral beauty is the most common source of awe. I've noticed this in myself. I can be greatly moved if I see people unexpectedly acting kindly to each other, or if I hear a story of great personal courage. We can experience awe, this is a second way we can experience awe, with the collective energy of people coming together. For example, a protest march like this one for Old Growth Forest, when I totally felt myself overwhelmed with emotion. At a sports event, cheering for your favorite football team, a musical concert, or collectively dancing together, we can feel awe. Nature is a third source of awe, a frequent one. And just as I witnessed at the Adams River, people want to connect with nature, its mystery, its power, and its solace. For me, awe in nature is sensory. The fragrance of poplar in the spring, a howling windstorm, or the way a field of camas has bees humming and buzzing on a warm summer's day. Music is a frequent source of awe, and humans, I think, are wired for music as well as awe. And one example that gives me shivers is this CD by the BC violinist Oliver Schroer. And Schroer recorded himself doing spontaneous compositions in churches as he walked the Camino. And I love the image on the right, where Schroer is a blur, because I think to him it was all about the music and the energy of those amazing churches. It wasn't about him. I think he was in awe most of the time, in that elevated state of consciousness. And maybe Van Gogh was too, when he painted Starry Night. Another source of awe is art and architecture. Visual beauty gives us awe. Another source is spiritual and religious. And this church on the prairie, as well as the beauty of the church, is that amazing isolation and loneliness of it. Okay, life and death, the profound experience of life and death evokes awe for many of us. Watching a baby be born. And these are the salmon that I talked about from that time I was at the Salmon River, washed down the river into Shuswap Lake during that intense experience with the cycle of life. A final source of awe is from epiphanies, when we suddenly understand something in a completely new way and understand an essential truth about life. I've skipped pretty quickly through 8 of the most common sources of awe. There are many cultural and individual variations in which ones we might collectively or individually hear. You may have your own paths to awe. Before I move on, I want to refer to the first Unitarian source, which is, and I'm quoting now, the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. And that, to me, is a description of awe. Now to my own journey and what I've learned about finding awe in my life. One of my first memories of an overwhelming sense of awe was as a young geography student. I'd been learning about the power of water and ice to shape landscapes, and our professor was a pilot and took several of us up in his small plane. And I looked down upon the landscapes of southern Alberta, and I was completely overwhelmed. I was awestruck. I had walked in these coulees and these valleys before, but here was a different perspective, showing me patterns and a new way of seeing how water shapes the landscape like veins in the earth. And it helped me begin to understand the earth as a living system, and that I was but a tiny part of that system. Now, fast forward a few years. I moved to the Shuswap area of BC and to this beautiful lake with my young daughter and my partner at the time. We had huge visions to do environmental education here on this lake. And for many years, I became caught up in life and all the complexity and hard work of making what we were trying to achieve happen. These were among the most challenging things that I've ever done, and they took completely all of my resources. I had no time to look outward, and I had no time for awe. I remember lying on this dock on summer nights, listening to the lake's quiet sounds, looking up at the stars, and yearning for something more. I wanted to reconnect to those feelings of wonder and mystery that I recalled from my youth. I lived in the midst of beauty and nature, but I wasn't completely present for it. Instead, I yearned for something else, some essential that I felt was missing in my life. I walked in the forest around the lake as much as I could. I couldn't have survived those years without the energy of nature. And eventually, my relationship with my partner dissolved, and it was nature that helped me heal. I began by looking small, paying attention, just as the line from Mary Oliver says, "Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." I focused on being totally present. When I walked, I would give myself a task, a small task, such as noticing everything red, and then writing about the color when I returned home. I would describe the red in this Oregon grape leaf or a shriveled rosehip. This outward focus helped me leave that yearning state, that wanting something else state. And paying attention and following my curiosity has led me to awe. Because of my environmental work, I focused on problems, like seeing only those invasive plants that I talked about earlier. After I moved into Salmon Arm, I would walk the shoreline trail on Shuswap Lake and notice the invasive plants, the ever-present highway noise. I was in a negative space. And then one day, I discovered a tree that had been partially chewed by a beaver. I was amazed at how the beaver had gnawed carefully through the spaces between the wires. The persistence of nature and how humans just won't win had me awestruck. I came back a day later and found that the beaver had kept going. My amazement, you can see in the photo, if you look carefully, the wires just at the base of the stump. So my amazement led me to learn more about beavers and then to write my first ever blog post. And in that moment, something shifted for me. I began to focus on things that astonished or inspired me or made me want to know more. And I've kept that up since moving to Victoria. By focusing on what I'm curious about, I've become more open to moments of awe. I now feel it much more often. Every time I visit the Moss Lady in Beacon Hill Park, watching a woman play in a loving way with her dog, or a child standing proud beside his uniformed father at the firefighters' memorial. I've felt it watching a man so joyfully focused on a baby in a stroller that he was oblivious to all passers-by. Those moments might be in that category of moral beauty. When we witness them, we feel better and in turn are more likely to be positive in our dealings with others. And here's another story of curiosity and awe. I'm always struck by this copper beech on the grounds of the legislature and that massive canopy. I did some research and learned that the tree was planted over 100 years ago to honor the provincial librarian who just died. And here it is, a little over 100 years ago. Now here's the part that really made me feel awe. 50 years ago, so halfway through its life, for reasons unknown, the tree was almost bulldozed. 2 journalists were in the vicinity, and one stood guard at the tree while the other, James Nesbitt, and here he is, he ran inside, found the Minister of Public Works, brought him outside, and the work was stopped. So I felt awe about the tree, but I also felt awe because of the courage of these people and how, thanks to their quick actions, I now enjoy in a deeply visceral way what they protected. I've learned that if we want to be open to awe, I need to practice mindfulness. So when I multitask, it's impossible to be totally present in the moment. So that means when I go for a walk, turning my phone off. We can't manufacture awe, but we can make ourselves more open to it. There's a saying, practice mindfulness and awe will come. One idea is the awe walk, an intentional walk in which we pay close attention to noticing things in the environment outside rather than to our inside self. An awe walk can also include breath practice to help us make that shift in our awareness. A similar and shorter technique I read about in one of those other awe books, and they've coined the acronym AWE, A.W.E. They call it, and they suggest that anyone can practice it even in just a few minutes. They call it microdosing mindfulness. So the A part of AWD is for focused attention on something pleasing. W is for waiting or staying with that moment. And E is the breath work, exhaling 1 or 2 deeper breaths, and then noticing the expansion of positive feelings. And I've practiced this, and actually I think it has something to it. 2 of my own paths to awe have been through music and art. While preparing this homily, I listened to a lot of music that I'd lost touch with, just hadn't really bothered listening to it. And I was just reminded of what a gift music is. And I'm constantly inspired by the colors and art of Victoria. Sometimes I walk just looking for color and striking art. And I love how Victoria's brilliant colors are reflected in so much public art. And here's a couple of examples. These are just murals. Keltner says that we become more open to awe when we choose unfamiliar paths. We see our world and our place in it with new eyes, just as I did when I was that young student flying over the prairie. We don't need dramatic change, though. Altering our routine might be all it takes. Awe will find us if we're open to it. Practicing mindfulness, and awe will come. And now, I leave you with some questions. What practices do you follow to help you connect with awe? And as we age, do you think we become more or less open to awe? And finally, what are your thoughts on that curious phrase, a responsibility to awe? Thank you.